Hey, I'm Summer.
And I'm Mike.
And we got married.
With children.
We're married 2 years now.
Blended for 11.
Like a margarita.
Yeah, baby, like a margarita.
And you're listening to the Everything Always podcast.
Want to tell them why we do this?
We do this because blending families isn't easy. There's step-parenting, co-parenting, his ex,
Her ex.
schedules, sibling rivalry,
Money issues.
custody issues.
Dating and relationship issues.
It's a whole lot of stuff.
Blended with a whole lot of good stuff.
And we're here to talk about all of it because we've done most of it.
We might not be experts, but we've learned a lot.
And we're still learning, and we want to share that with you.
Thanks for joining. Now let's go.
Hello, Everything Always listeners. Welcome to another episode. Today, I have a couples expert as my guest. His name is Brian Mayer, and I actually found him from listening to his podcast, which is called The Remarried Life. And he works with remarried couples and that whole blended family dynamic. And I'm really happy to have him on the show because we just have this super candid conversation about the real things that we deal with, things that he's dealt with, and some tips that he's learned to get through those challenging moments. And there's a lot of things that we go through as a remarried couple, or even if you are just dating somebody after marriage or dating somebody who is divorced and has an ex-spouse with kids. There's just a lot that goes on. Obviously, that's why we do this podcast, to talk about all of those things. And it's so cool to get to sit down and talk to a man who has gone through this, who he's really transparent actually on the show in terms of what he's done in the past, that he's like, you know what, I could have done that differently, and things that he has learned from. And I love that. I have so much mad respect for people who look back and say, you know what, I might have been guilty of doing these things and I've learned from it and now I'm doing it differently, which is so great. So he's also a mental health therapist, and he does some amazing things for couples. And I thought it would be so great to have him on the show and talk about some of the questions that you guys write in about a lot, which I so appreciate. And what's interesting is that there's a lot of similar questions. And so I'm trying to hit those with Brian because he's an expert on that. And things like how your spouse now deals with their ex and how it might infiltrate into your relationship, and how do we overcome that? How do we deal with that? And what happens when there are those really heated moments with the person you're co-parenting with. So high conflict co-parenting, that is just something that just seems to come up again and again. And the more that we can talk about that and the more that we can learn from these experts on how to deal with it, I think the better our toolkit is. So that's my goal here. Check out the interview. I think you're going to really like it. Enjoy. Hey, Brian, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hey, Summer. It's really great to be joining you. I'm just really happy to be here, and I love the work that you and Mike do. So definitely looking forward to talking.
Well, we love the work that you do, and I know that we're going to get into some really good stuff today that our audience struggles with, and that, involves co-parenting, especially when there's high conflict happening, and also how it can seep its way into relationships, into your now current marriage. So I'm excited to get into all of that. But I first would love our audience to hear a bit about you, like your situation, where you're at right now, and why this work became important to you.
Yeah, definitely. As we were kind of talking before we started recording, I'm kind of have surrounded myself with helping people with relationships. And first of all, I have my own private practice. I'm a mental health therapist, but I do 95% of what I do is I help couples in relationships of all different kinds. And I see a lot of people with, in the blended family kind of arena. I also, through the church that I attend, my wife and I are the directors of the marriage mentoring ministry. So we help people there. And then in my own personal life, I'm actually divorced and remarried. So my divorce actually was now about 20 years ago. So it's quite a while ago, but I still remember it like it wasn't that long ago. And so I think personally, professionally, I just have a lot of experience that I'm hoping to be able to share with people, and hopefully, again, be able to share a little bit of that today. So, yeah.
Yes, please do. So, the big thing that we get a lot is when there's the disagreement between co parents, but instead of it just being a disagreement, it turns into putting each other down or really getting people feeling like helpless, like they can't come to a common ground with the person they're trying to co parent with. So there's that issue. And then it's how it's dealt with that then affects the current relationship, either the remarriage or the person they're dating. Then that becomes complicated because all kinds of emotions and things get a little bit spiraled out of control.
Yeah.
I think the big thing is like, kind of like what does that look like, and how can we ease that, and what do we do when sometimes it's us feeling ourselves feeling out of control? So what do we do for ourselves, and also what do we do when the other person's out of control?
Right. Yeah. Those are all good things. And you bring up a very good point. It's like we not only have to deal with an ex-spouse with parenting and with kind of, dealing with figuring all that out. But then sometimes, depending on how we deal with the ex-spouse, our current spouse doesn't like it. And then it's like we feel like sometimes we're like caught in the middle of this thing, and we're trying to please two people. And I think a lot of times sometimes that's not even possible.
Right.
And so, yeah. So, and I definitely have, I think, a lot to say on this today because, again, like I said, I think professionally speaking, I've seen this a lot, and I help a lot of couples with this, but also in my own personal life. And I've had this situation, and I hate to admit it, but to be completely honest with you, I think a lot of times I ended up being that sort of high conflict parent who unfortunately had some anger over my divorce. And I think I let a lot of my decision making be affected or influenced by my anger and sort of my bitterness. And again, if I was honest with myself at the time, which I really wasn't, that was what was happening quite a bit. I thought, I'm just making the decisions for the good of my daughter. I have one daughter, and we shared her with my ex-wife. And so, I would oftentimes think, well, I'm just making decisions again for her good. But as I've stepped away from it and gotten many years, in between that and now, I have realized that a lot of it was just out of my own anger. And it took a lot of work to realize that and to make some changes. And so, but yeah, I've got all kinds
of super admirable, by the way. Super.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the one thing, like I said, I hate admitting that was my problem. I think one thing that I have been good with is I've generally been good at like self-reflecting and just sort of understanding my part that I play. Of course, when you're in the moment, you're emotional and the emotions are running hot, that's the last thing you're thinking about is the role that I'm playing. So again, sometimes it takes kind of taking a step back. So yeah, I've got all kinds of, hopefully, some good solid tips and strategies for your audience today that we can talk through to maybe help them with some of these scenarios. But, again, kind of like you said, it's like you're just being sort of pulled in two different directions sometimes, which can make it a lot tougher.
Yeah. What do you think that turning point was for you that made you realize, maybe I need to take responsibility here or look at the way that I've been behaving, or like, what was it that made you see things differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it was a specific sort of light bulb moment for me or it just happened over time. I think probably if I think back, it was mostly that I recognized I wasn't getting the response that I was looking for.
Yeah.
When you get angry and you're upset and you're emotional and you're just saying all the wrong things, in your mind in the moment, you're thinking, okay, this is going to cause my ex-spouse to kind of do what I'm looking for them to do. They're going to, follow what I'm looking for, and it's all going to be magical and wonderful and unicorns and rainbows. And then I started realizing, well, actually the opposite ends up happening. And either we might get escalated in our conversations, or I might have a tendency to shut my ex-spouse down, to where she would all of a sudden withdraw, if I got that way. So, I think it was just sort of a repeated sort of hitting my head against a brick wall. I think that finally I realized, wow, this doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And probably not
So
getting you the results that you're hoping for.
that's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So I think, for some people, it probably is an epiphany or a light bulb moment. For others, it's probably just something you're going to have to kind of see and go through over time. And I know I'm talking about this as if was sort of the angry parent, and I definitely have my moments, but I'm sure, if you talk to my ex-wife, she'd probably say the same thing. She had her moments too. So, it's just hard either way that you're on either side of the fence that you're on.
Yeah. I think, something that I've noticed is that high conflict sometimes isn't consistently high conflict. So when people say that, it's like, it's not that sometimes it's not that you're constantly fighting, it's that things can go smooth for a while, but there's still so many emotions that things can get triggered. And then
Yes.
the way that it's dealt with is like, oh my gosh, now things are out of control. And I've seen things like that in our situations. Mike has seen that in his situation where it's like, oh, things are pretty calm and smooth for, a couple of weeks. And then it's like one little thing, one little disagreement can happen, or one person could be late or something, and things can get heated. And so I'd love to hear, when that happens, because obviously yes, there's probably past hurt emotions. There's also
Hmm.
things not going your way, and
Yeah.
there's egos that are bruised. Like, what are some of your tips, and like, how can we, as co-parents, prevent those types of situations from happening?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just like you said, I use the word trigger all the time because, a lot of times, of course, it's the person standing in front of you that's doing whatever they're doing. They're getting upset. They're, waving their arms and their, voices escalated or whatever. And of course, yeah, I mean, we can't look away from that. But at the same time, we all have triggers, just like you said. And what triggers are to me are there things that are inside of us, I think, that can kind of mushroom the other person's response. And then in our minds, it sort of becomes larger than it really is. The one big thing for me is I think if we can realize that sometimes their upset or their anger, it really isn't even about us. I mean, sometimes it is, but sometimes it might not be. It might be that your ex-spouse has other frustrations in life and maybe other situations aren't going their way that aren't even connected to your divorce. And I think, again, just kind of taking a step back to maybe potentially realize that. Now, I know, of course, because your relationship has been severed and you're not married, you don't have that romantic relationship, you're probably not going to be going and diving in and asking questions about what's going on in their life and how are they feeling. And I understand you have to be careful with that. But I think just mentally, just kind of understanding that maybe this could potentially not even be about you, I think would be kind of one thing to do. And then, secondly, I would say, is there anything that you're doing to fuel the fire? Because I think sometimes it is the hardest thing for us to do is to sort of look in the mirror to realize, our own part in the chaos. And when I work with couples in the therapy room, I like to talk a lot about this sort of negative loop. And you may have talked about this on your podcast, I don't know, but it's just sort of a negative loop of conversation that occurs. And I like to tell people, like, it's the loop that's the enemy. It's not either of you. And you end up getting in this swirl and you just, you just are just looking at the other person thinking they're the problem. So that's another thing I think, and then I would say too, kind of going into it, just knowing, just becoming more aware of how you're feeling when you're about ready to enter into a conversation or a meeting. Are your emotions running high? Like, what's going on for you? And again, as a mental health therapist, I often tell people, like, start to think in terms of, well, how does my body feel right now? Is my chest tense? Is there a lump in my throat? Am I flushed? Am I heated?
Yes.
Start to become more aware of those. And then just breathing. I even say just simply just do some breathing to kind of calm that fight or flight sort of response down. So I don't know. I know I threw a lot at you there, but there's just some initial thoughts on some things that, I think about in terms of when you're trying to come together and and discuss or transition the kids.
Yes. I love that. I love recognizing where you feel it in your body. And it's so true. I've told my kids to do that. And when there's, heated up or angry at each other or something, it's like, take 10 deep breaths. And you think there's
Yeah.
no way that's going to work. I'm so upset, but something physically starts to change. And then you're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. You start to think about it differently. So instead of
Right.
acting on that impulse of anger, you like calm yourself down and then
Right.
respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Not to get too scientific about it, but we have this piece in our brain called the amygdala. And they say that when we're emotionally flooded, the amygdala is like our warning signal, and it feels like it's sensing danger. And so what happens is sort of all the blood just kind of, runs to a certain area of our body. And then because, again, it thinks we're in danger, and it kind of runs away from those parts of your brain that are important and making logical, decisions, or, brainstorming with each other, or being able to listen. So yeah, it's a lot more important than we really realize. So,
Yeah. And what's great too is that we can control those things. It just feels like we're out of control when you're
right.
emotionally triggered like that.
Yep.
So here's probably one of the most common things I'll hear. And I'll be honest, it does come more from women that will write in than the men, although we've heard it on both sides. So a spouse will get heated up or upset because of his ex. And so then the current spouse is getting upset that they're fighting, and it's now coming into their relationship. And the big thing is how it's being handled. So those situations are, well, I think you should have, told her this. Or I think you should have done it this way. And that's what starts to cause things. And I can't tell you how many times we have people writing in saying, I just wish that my husband would have done this instead. And what am I to do? And, it's so interesting how you can see it from the outside, but I get the feelings that they're having because they're feeling threatened in their relationship. Their peace or their love or whatever it is feeling threatened by this outside force. And that outside force is most likely going to be there forever. So it's, how do you do that and protect your relationship?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Summer. And it's one that, I definitely hear this one a lot. And I think the constant sort of refrain that I hear is there's one spouse that feels caught in the middle, because they're trying to deal with the ex-spouse and their current spouse. And then their current spouse, the other partner, the other current partner, feels like an outsider. And so, so one feels like they're pulled in all these different directions, and the other one feels like they're not even in the ring. I think a lot of times what I like to tell couples or say to them is like, look, I mean, number one, you have different personalities. One, like you handle situations differently. You just have to recognize that's part of it. I mean, because maybe one of you is more direct in your communication style and one of you is more of a people pleaser. And that's just your nature. And yes, you can, make requests for your partner to be a little bit more firm and a little bit more direct. But if that's not the way they are personally, then it's going to be hard for them to change that. And then, so that's number one. And then I think number two probably is just, how you were raised, of course, and what you went through as a child will often color sort of how you see things. So it might be a good idea to talk to your current partner, your current spouse, about how were you raised? How did you handle conflict? Or, when there was a disagreement, how did you handle it? And you both can learn from each other and understand, oh, you know what, when I was growing up, mom and dad just pushed things under the rug. They didn't really want to talk about anything. Everything always just seemed wonderful. And that's that probably is the way I kind of handle things. And, it was just a fight to do everything in my home, and you had to speak up in order for your voice to be heard. And, I hear that one a lot, and both of them will kind of discover, oh, we grew up differently. So I think that's number two. And then I think number three probably is, be honest with yourself. Are there insecurities that you have? I mean, maybe in your past relationship, your past marriage, maybe there was infidelity. And so now that you're in this current marriage, you kind of wonder, I wonder if, my husband, for example, and his ex-wife, I wonder if they still have feelings for each other. And I hear that one a lot. And when I start to ask about past infidelities, I'll often find out that the spouse that I'm talking to that has the insecurity has had a lot of infidelity in their past. And so, and again, we're not trying to dismiss or make excuses and say that certain behaviors in the present moment, maybe they aren't appropriate. But again, I think there's a lot of things that are kind of going on behind the scenes that I think we have to understand first. So I think if you take that in conjunction with what's happening in the present moment, I think it can help couples, I think, deal with things a little bit better. Again, is it a magic pill or a magic wand? No, but I think you can get people a little bit further along. So I don't know if that answers your question, Summer, but
Yeah, but it sounds like, really just being able to understand the other person more and where they're coming from helps you, instead of making that assumption of he still has feelings for her or she still has feelings for him. It's, starting to understand, oh, maybe it's just that he's a people pleaser, and
yeah,
so he's really just trying to do his best. And that's something that I've seen a lot in some relationships with stepmoms. That happens. It's like, oh, he goes out of his way, but it's like going, well, maybe he's doing that because he's trying to be the very best dad that he can do, and that's the mother
yeah,
of his children. At the same time, Mike and I always talk about having boundaries and understanding, like,
yeah,
what is acceptable in your relationship as to how far you will go.
right. Yep, that's exactly right. So yeah, those are excellent additional points to what I said as well. So definitely things to consider for sure.
Hey guys, guess what? We have a new website where you can see all of our podcasts and get easy access to the show notes, everything we talk about on the episodes, and you can even listen to the podcast directly from the site. You can contact us through the site and share your thoughts and questions. Check it out at www.everythingalways.co. That's www.everythingalways.co.
And you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Everything Always Co. We just set it up and we'll be sure to put important announcements there.
And we love that this podcast has been so helpful to so many, and our hope is to share it with even more. So can you help us? Will you take a moment now or after the episode to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, and share it? It would mean the world to us, and it helps us to keep bringing you the best content.
Come on, we appreciate you guys. So what do you say, baby? Back to the episode?
Back to the episode. What are some other things in terms of, like, what are the common things that you deal with with people that you're working with in terms of the new marriage? Like, what are the common issues they're trying to work through?
Yeah, I think it's, kind of, again, just like a little bit about what we talked about, just how best to handle the transitioning of the kids with the ex-spouse and all that goes in with that. Obviously parenting styles, which I'm sure you've talked a ton about, and I'm sure you and your husband probably maybe have a different parenting style from each other. My wife and I certainly do. That's a really big one. And usually what I tell people with that is like, probably the healthiest place to be in your parenting style is if you can balance out rules and relationship with your children. And sometimes when those get out of whack, like if you're too focused on the relationship, then it's all about, well, I'm, my child's friend. And, we know that that's not good. Or, on the other hand, if you're too skewed toward the rules, then it's all of a sudden you're a drill sergeant and you don't really care about your kids' feelings. And so I say, if you can keep a balance with that, it's really the best place to be. But I often find with couples, it always seems like one person's a little bit more skewed toward the rules and the other person skewed toward the relationship, and can certainly cause problems. So that's a big one. I think it's interesting now that we're in the time that we're in with this pandemic that we're under. It's creating new challenges, I think, for couples and blended families, and that there'll be a lot of, and maybe it kind of goes back to what we talked about a little while ago with the ex-spouse, and that one partner will be a little bit more timid about wanting the kids to be around other people, and the other person's like, oh, this isn't a big deal. I don't even know if I believe that this thing is real anyway. So what are you so worried about?
We have gotten so many questions on that It's so funny.
Yeah. Right,
Yeah,
right. And that might be a full episode we can talk about. So,
totally, totally.
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, so I mean, I guess those are a big thing. And then sometimes too, and I'll be honest as well, like as a therapist, I mean, sometimes I'm sitting in a room with a couple and they're just, I mean, talking about the major amounts of chaos in the home and all the moving parts and all the craziness. And it's like sometimes my head starts to spin with them, even thinking about where in the world do we even start? Like, what do we do? What do we tackle first, you know? And you can kind of get to a place where you just sometimes feel like you want to give up because it's just too much. It's a lot.
It is.
But, you know, again, that's another place where I tell couples, like, look, I mean, a lot of the research says with blended families that, what do they say? Sometimes it can take 7 years in order for you to feel somewhat normal. And then I've even heard that sometimes you never feel that way. So,
It's so
um,
true. Well, and I
yeah.
think there's so many things that come into play with that, depending on how often you have the kids, how often do you have all of them together? If you both have kids, there's so many things that come into play. But yeah, it was, I believe that. And I would say when I look at our family, I think it took about that long. It doesn't mean that there weren't amazing, great times in those first 7 years, but I will say it took a long time to just feel that just kind of like natural, this is all of our home together. I think there were so many times where it was like, wait, there's these people in my house, or there's me saying there's these people in my home. There's all these different kinds of feelings and emotions that it takes a long time to process. You don't just like get
Mhm.
advice and then the next day it's all better. Like you have
Yeah, that's
to.
exactly right. Yeah, I've kind of learned some things in my own walk, not even in the blended family, but just with owning my own business that, you know, I had a lot of people go before me and would tell me, hey, you know, you might want to watch out for this or don't do that, or, you know, and I would just go ahead and do it anyway. And I would have to fail at it about 5 times before I would realize, oh, okay, maybe that's not what I want to do. So, so you
Yeah.
can, I mean, you can get all the advice in the world sometimes. And, you know, you'll think, well, I'm just going to go ahead and give this a shot myself. And then we kind of, sometimes we just have to learn through experience. But I think it's a combination you know, listening to podcasts like yours and, you know, hearing from other people, but also again, sometimes it just takes the school of hard knocks for us to be able to learn.
Yes, absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask you about because of your work with couples is the feeling of guilt when there is a new marriage or there's a new relationship, especially marriage, and we're trying to give the example of a healthy marriage to our children. But there's also this feeling of, well, I have my kids now, maybe you have them 50-50, maybe you have them less than that, whatever it is that you get to see them, it's not full time like it once was before. And so there's this guilt to have time with your spouse, like, oh no, but I shouldn't be. I should have all of my time with the kids. And I see parents struggle with that a lot. And so things might come up, or there's this event we want to go to, or we want to have date night, or we want to, I know what Mike and I have chosen to do, but I know that couples still, it's a struggle because they have this guilt that if they only have this amount of time with their kids, the time should be spent with them entirely.
Right. There's a lot that goes into that guilt. It sort of affects, I think, all different areas of what might be happening. I know, again, it can affect, you know, how you parent, you know, when you, and this is another area. I feel like, Summer, you keep hitting areas of personal, uh, personal issues for me. But yeah, I had a lot of guilt over what had happened. And so it kind of, I think, filtered the way in which I parented. And so I was that parent that, again, it was more about probably the relationship than it should have been. I think one thing that helped me in that area is, and this was through many discussions with my wife, and we even went to some mentors to talk it through, but realizing that, you know, how would my daughter be when she's 25 or 30? Would she look back on this time and say, Dad, I'm really appreciative of what you did and the boundaries you put in place or whatever? And, you know, so I tried not to listen as much to that inner voice of myself that was saying, oh, you know, go easy, don't worry about it. But rather, you know, what would she say to me when she's 30? Would she be proud of the way I parented? So I think that's one thing. And then, yeah, just again, it is tough. Just the feeling of, you don't have your kids, with you full time, and, thinking that, oh, it's got to be fun. And, I've just got to make it just a blast, like, all the time. And I guess that's probably another, I might be going down off on a tangent here, but that's another one I hear too, is like, the full-time parent, the primary parent, however you want to call it, will be upset that the parent that maybe only sees the kids on the weekend, it's like, it's all fun over there and you don't have any rules and they eat whatever they want. And, and to some degree, I must say, well, if you only saw your children, once a week or, one day a week or something, of course, you're probably going to lean toward wanting to make it a little bit more fun. So I tell people, try to go a little bit easy on that. I mean, so, but, again, there could be a bit of guilt playing a role into that fun too. So it's something you have to be aware of and think about. So
Yeah.
again, I don't know if that answered your question, but it's just my thoughts there.
Well, no, and it actually, it did answer a lot. And I'm also, as you said that so for example, a parent that only sees their child, say maybe every other weekend or just on the weekends. So I've seen where the other parent who has the child most of the time may make the other parent feel guilty if that parent decides to go out on a date with, her new husband or something like that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And there's guilt there. Like, well, you shouldn't be going anywhere. You shouldn't be doing that. So kind of the question is, I feel like some remarried couples have this guilt of, well, I want to make sure that I keep my relationship a priority. I also want my kids to know that they're super important and I'm going to be there when I have that time with them. So, I've seen parents say, the kids weren't with you all these other days. You should have gone on a date night then, but then,
right.
But then the new husband or something is like, what? I had this really like big, event or something, and I wanted my wife with me, or, there's these different pressures. And so I guess the question is how to overcome that kind of guilt. It's like, no matter what, as parents, we always feel guilty about something, but how to overcome that and like make sure that you're still protecting your relationship with your spouse and also the relationship with your kids.
Yeah, right. That one, again, that comes up a lot too. And it's, kind of my opinion on it is that, unless something illegal is going on at the other home, I think it's best just not to really question, the parenting or what's exactly happening, or, are you going on dates when the kids are over there or whatever? It's like, but then on the other side of the coin, probably I think maybe the question you're asking too is that, how do you deal with that when I guess the other parent is kind of questioning that? And again, I know it probably sounds simple and cliched, but, to not feel guilty about that because, you have a life to live as well. And you have needs and wants and desires as an adult, with your current mate and whether or not they're your spouse or not. And so, but obviously, working to keep that balance. But I think kids do well when they see relationships with their parents that are going well. I mean, new relationships, I should say. And a lot of times we do feel that guilt of like, oh, I don't want them to see me kissing you or hugging you because I know that they're kind of upset about our relationship. And, to that I say, again, think about them, your kids, in terms of when they're 30 or 40 years old. Are they really, as a 40-year-old, going to say, yeah, I didn't like when you kissed, my stepmom in front of me, or I didn't think that was the right thing to do? Well, they might say, yeah, when I was a kid, I felt that way. But now that I'm, 30 or 40 years old, I see, no, that was the right thing that you did. So again, I keep saying it, but sometimes, and again, this helped me personally, but just thinking about what would my daughter say when she's 30 or 40 about what I was doing.
That's such a great gauge. I love that because being in a blended family like really forces you to be your most mature self. Hopefully that's what you're wanting to be, but it really accelerates that because you do have to look at that. And we as parents get so upset, when, especially with little kids, when they're upset, we're upset. And so you want to do whatever you can to make it better. And I remember, times when our boys, Mike's Mike's son and my son, when they first started sharing a room, and it was like they had this period of time where they just did not get along.
Mm.
And there were times where I was just like, oh, we can't do this to them, or we have to make sure that we only have, this one here and that one not be here. It was like, what can we do to just make it easy for them? And my husband would say, well, that's not real life though. I mean, here's the thing. We're building a family here. They're gonna have to start to learn. This is part of the journey. And we're providing them a loving environment. We're raising, we're doing the right things, but he said, even if they were, blood brothers, this kind of stuff would happen. But you just feel so upset, like, oh my gosh, are they going to hate me? Are they going to this? You think of all these things, but now they're older and they totally get along, and they have funny stories that they share. Like, our older one will be like, yeah, I used to get so annoyed with you. Now it's just funny to me. I
Yeah,
used to think this and now it's just whatever. And it's so interesting now to hear that. And it's like, what if we hadn't given them that opportunity? If we had just pulled it away from them and just like, nope, got to make you comfortable all the time. It's like, oh, you know what? It's okay to be uncomfortable and learn how to, make a relationship okay and make it work. Like that's part of life. So I love that, looking into the future. And I can say that just even now, after all these years, looking into the future, it's true. So what would they say?
Right, exactly. And if I could just real quick kind of give an analogy that I think really has always stuck with me, and that, when you're in a car and you're driving, I mean, if you think about it, you're definitely looking all over the place. Like you're looking in your rearview mirror, you're looking out the side, you're maybe even, occasionally checking the radio on the inside, and you're looking out the front window. But if you think about it, I think probably what we do the most is we should be looking out the front window forward, out into the future to see what lies ahead. And of course, we do have our moments where we've got to check the rearview mirror and look into the past and see some things. We might need to, again, fiddle with the radio, which is all about the present moment. It's what's going on inside the car with us right at that time. But again, our main focus really needs to be up ahead of us, because if we spend too much time looking in the past or even thinking about what's going on presently, we might find ourselves in a ditch. So, so that's kind of, that really helped me, I think, just kind of realize, okay, again, it's all about looking forward a little bit more often.
It's such a great analogy. I love that so much.
Yeah.
And you have one thing I used to think of actually when I was younger and talking about like the different, how you can control your present moment. I used to think about the radio as well. If you don't like the song, you switch the station, you switch the frequency basically of the energy that's going on. Like, okay, well, let's switch that, 'cause I don't like this or that. And we do have the power to do that and see things in the present moment the way we choose to see them. It doesn't have to be through,
That's exactly right.
Turn it into the experience that you want. It's so hard. Sometimes it's hard to do that, but we are in control of that.
Yep, exactly.
Brian, so much good stuff here. I love just getting to have a conversation I just love talking to other parents that are, who get that, who get it.
Yeah, right.
And
we need that.
We do need that. We need that. And sometimes it's me seeking out help from other people. And then sometimes I just love that my experience and things that we've gone through can help other families. And I hope that we've done that today for our listeners. How can our listeners find out more about you, find your podcast, and all the amazing things you do?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Summer. I know I didn't really talk about the podcast, but I do a podcast, I suppose similar to yours. It's called The Remarried Life. And you can find it at theremarriedlife.com, and all kinds of great episodes. I've been doing the podcast for about 3 years. And, as you can imagine, I talk about all kinds of great topics, but I do sometimes have a tendency to want to focus, because again, I'm a mental health therapist. I like to focus on, ourselves and kind of getting in touch with us and, our thoughts and our emotions and our own behaviors. And of course, there's a lot of talk about, the blended family and everything that goes along with that and all the chaos and all the complications. But I really do feel like it starts with just us as a person. So yeah, just jump on over to that. And again, lots of great episodes. I would also encourage people, if they would, to go to the remarriedlife.com shared parenting. There's a shared parenting checklist they can pick up, and they can get signed up to get the newsletter. And so all kinds of great tips and resources that I provide on the newsletter. So those are probably, I suppose, the best ways to find me.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure, as always, to have that in the show notes. Brian, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so great.
Yeah, this has been fantastic, Summer. I'd love to do this more. So
Absolutely.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Our goal is to bring you all kinds of value that will help you navigate these challenging waters of blending a family.
Reach out to us if there's something specific you want to hear.
And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast.
And if you really like it, share with someone you love.
Ooh, and be bold enough to share it with someone you don't.